So for this segment, what we're going to do is take complaints from the federal court document filed against NASA by Blue Origin and point to where those complaints are justified in both the 24-page Kathy Lueder's Award of HLS Option A and in the 76-page GAO publicly released document that rejected the Blue Origin and Dianetics protests. As a sworn document, we are going to assume Blue Origin had a basis for each of their claims, and we can point to passages in the other documents that make particular claims as plain as day. Now, going through legal documents can be a little bit dry, but bear with us because there's a lot of very important information in here that people have probably not seen before. The first 18 paragraphs form the introductory body to what follows in the 58-page, 175-paragraph document, and we're not going to go through every page and point, mainly the introduction and the highlights, because Blue Origin definitely had a case here. After the introduction paragraph 1, outlining the issues at hand, paragraph 2 is worth reading verbatim, as it outlines how NASA's decision, and by NASA we mean Kathy Lueder's as the signing authority in the HLS Option A procurement, quote, violates fundamental tenets of procurement law and is arbitrary, capricious, and irrational. Historically a staunch advocate for prioritizing safety, NASA inexplicably disregarded key flight safety requirements for only SpaceX in order to select and make award to a SpaceX proposal that NASA's evaluation team assessed as extremely high risk and immensely complex, even before the waiver of safety requirements. The waiver of 13 flight readiness reviews permitted SpaceX to propose a technical solution that included 16 or more launches in a launch cadence the contracting officer admitted was logically inconsistent with the solicitation's requirement for one flight readiness review prior to each launch. In other words, SpaceX's initial proposal was unawardable. The agency acknowledged that SpaceX failed to meet a material solicitation requirement, redacted. The agency's decision to select SpaceX's deficient proposal for initial conditional award was irrational and in direct violation of the solicitation's ground rules, stating offerors are hereby notified that proposals evaluated as having one or more deficiencies are unawardable. And that pretty much spells everything out. In the GAO decision, this is what we found on pages 9 and 10. This is quoted from the NASA negotiation letter to SpaceX. Given the arguably ambiguous nature of this topic within the Option A solicitation, and the fact that its most stringent possible interpretation, FRR no later than 2 weeks prior to the launch of each supporting spacecraft, every individual tanker starship is a supporting spacecraft, is logically inconsistent with the technical approach proposed by your firm, i.e. 14 launches, each spaced only 12 days apart from one another. It is NASA's assessment that in order to meet NASA's intent of its FRR requirement for supporting spacecraft, your firm must incorporate additional FRRs for the deleted and tanker starship supporting spacecraft, which is NASA giving Musk specific instructions on how to get their proposal selected for award, which are laid out in even further detail in the following paragraph, quoted from tab 191 of the negotiation letter at 35222. Paragraph 3 relays how Blue Origin protested this award with the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, who agreed that NASA's solicitation required one FRR per each launch of each HLS element, including supporting spacecraft, and proposed the multiple FRRs be required, noting in their determination that SpaceX did not meet that requirement. Further, NASA ignored their own contemporaneous documents, arguing these FRRs in their own solicitation of one per vehicle were now somehow not required. Paragraph 4 identifies how NASA changed their positions on the FRRs, and their new for litigation position was that they could remove this requirement, should they so choose, on the SpaceX vehicles and orbiting fuel depot that had not yet been designed, let alone become operational. Paragraph 5 states that even the GAO rejected this argument as having insufficient FRRs, considering the 16 total launches required for SpaceX's concept of operations. Relevant passages in the GAO decision are located starting on page 71. This is a verbatim read of several paragraphs because the details and the wording in here are very important. As addressed above, SpaceX's concept of operations contemplated 16 total launches consisting of one launch of its deleted, and at this point we have to conclude this deletion refers to the SpaceX propellant depot that doesn't exist, because we know that an orbiting propellant depot is contemplated in the SpaceX paradigm, but the word depot doesn't appear anywhere in this document. Deletions, however, occur in several places where depot would be a logical replacement, like here. 14 launches of its tanker starships to supply fuel deleted. See what we mean? And 1 launch of its HLS lander starship, which would be deleted. Presumably this would be refilled in orbit and then travel to the moon. The protesters contend that the Option A BAA requires an FRR for each launch, or a total of 16 FRRs, one for each launch contemplated by SpaceX's concept of operations. The protesters contend that NASA waived this material requirement when it only required SpaceX to propose 3 FRRs, or an FRR for each type of starship. NASA argues that the solicitation was ambiguous as to whether an FRR was required for each launch or for the launch of each type of element. The agency explains it reasonably assessed a weakness with SpaceX's proposed management approach because the awardee only proposed 1 overarching FRR milestone review 2 weeks prior to the launch of its HLS Starship, which would occur after SpaceX commenced launching its deleted and tanker starships. As discussed above during post-selection negotiations with SpaceX, NASA required SpaceX to amend its proposal to incorporate additional FRRs to be completed no later than 2 weeks before 1. The launch of the awardee's deleted, and 2. The launch of its first of 14 tanker starships. NASA asserts that SpaceX's subsequent incorporation of these additional 2 FRRs brought the proposal into compliance with the agency's intent for the FRR requirements. Where a protester and agency disagree over the meaning of solicitation language, we will resolve the matter by reading the solicitation as a whole and in a manner that gives effect to all of its provisions. To be reasonable and therefore valid, an interpretation must be consistent with the solicitation when read as a whole and in a reasonable manner. Here, we think the protesters present the more reasonable interpretation of the Option A BAA's FRR requirements. As addressed above, the Option A BAA SOW established a requirement for FRRs, which are reviews designed to determine the system's readiness for a safe and successful flight or launch and for subsequent flight operations. AR Tab 8 Option A BAA Attachment G SOW at 15089. The SOW, Solicitation of Work, provided that FRRs should be completed 2 weeks before launch of each HLS element. The Option A BAA's milestone acceptance criteria and payment schedule template, which was incorporated as Attachment O, stated that an FRR is required prior to each launch of an HLS element. Propose multiple FRRs as required. Thus, we find that the Option A BAA required an FRR to be completed prior to each launch of an HLS element, which definition includes supporting spacecraft. NASA's competing interpretation would essentially require us to read language out of and into the solicitation's requirement. Specifically, we would need to read supporting spacecraft out of the definition of HLS and the each out of each launch. Additionally, we would need to read in the concept of each element type, specifically that an FRR is only required to be completed prior to the launch of each type of HLS element. As between the two proffered interpretations, we find the protesters' interpretation, which relies on the text as written, to be more natural and compelling than the agency's proffered interpretation. In our view, the agency's interpretation would require us to construe the agency's intent based on information not found in the plain text of the solicitation. Thus, where the Option A BAA required an FRR before each launch of an HLS element, SpaceX's 3 proposed FRRs, or 1 for each type of HLS element, were insufficient when SpaceX's concept of operations will require 16 total launches. To sum it up, the GAO concluded NASA leaders misinterpreted the language of their own SOW and gave award to a SpaceX proposal that the GAO agreed was insufficient and therefore should have been recorded as a deficiency, this being the argument that forms the core of the Blue Origin lawsuit. But that's not the only way NASA gave preference to SpaceX. Let's go back to their filing. Paragraph 6 describes how the GAO found Blue Origin was not prejudiced against nor harmed by submitting a proposal that adhered to the FRRs as required, declaring Blue Origin's protest invalid, which was a stunning lapse of judgment on the GAO's behalf, especially considering the outcome. Paragraph 7 details further, although redacted, ways in which additional errors in the SpaceX proposal were waived, but only for SpaceX, without the other 2 offerers being notified. Paragraph 8 informs the court of the following timelines per the solicitation: that the mission preliminary design review must occur no later than July of 2022, L-18 months. The mission critical design review must occur no later than January 2023, L-12 months, and the systems acceptance review must occur no later than September of 2023, L-4 months. As we know all too well at this point, Starship had absolutely no chance in hell of hitting any of those milestone dates, because here we are at the beginning of 2024 and test articles are still blowing up on every launch, sometimes twice. Paragraph 9 states that Blue Origin was not made aware by NASA nor the GAO that NASA had relaxed the foundational requirements of the solicitation, such as the FRRs. So Blue Origin was unable to address this issue as it was under seal, and Council could not discuss the issue with Blue Origin, who only found out about this after the ruling was made public on August 10th of 2021. This can only be described as tying Blue Origin's hands behind their back during this critical legal review process. Paragraphs 10 through 12 reads from the GAO decision, a pertinent question whether the protesters would have submitted a different offer that would have had a reasonable possibility of being selected for award had it known that the requirement would be waived. The GAO assumed the answer was no. Lacking the information to know, the answer would have been yes. And of course, if the terms of the solicitation are changed, it would only make sense for all parties to have an opportunity to address those changes. That is simple fair dealing. Paragraph 13 declares Blue Origin was prejudiced against by the agency's waiver of the FRR and other review requirements without notifying Blue Origin, who would have proposed different technical, management, and price ratings based on the relaxed requirements. Neither Blue Origin nor Dianetics were afforded the opportunity to modify their bids on the same grounds as SpaceX did. Paragraph 14 states, the agency, leaders, violated the solicitation, federal procurement regulations and statute, and an implied in-fact contract when it failed to treat all offerors fairly, rationally, and in accordance with the law. And from the information available, there is no denying that to be the case. Leaders stated this fact very clearly, obviously thinking that she could make up the rules as she went, and not even the GAO agreed with how she handled this change of flight readiness review requirements. Footnote 34 deals with the language used by leaders to defend her decision and the GAO's refusal of it. NASA raises other arguments for why it believes that SpaceX complied with the requirement to conduct FRRs for each launch. We do not find the agency's contrary arguments persuasive. For example, the agency argues that SpaceX proposed to delete it. This argument, however, is inconsistent with the Option A BAA SOW's provision that the government will have responsibility for certification of flight readiness, and that such reviews were not deleted, which in this case we're going to conclude means optional. This is a very interesting footnote, in that it quietly states that the agency will bear responsibility for FRR certification, while leaders on behalf of NASA claims 13 such reviews were not going to be required. In paragraphs 15 and 16, Blue Origin contends that NASA, aka leaders, is being duplicitous in this BAA procurement process by stating that the proposals were not to be compared against each other, while at the same time demanding they adhere to a 79-page common statement of work, a 49-page common requirements document, and a 155-page data procurement document, but then stating no offeror can challenge the evaluation of another offeror's proposal because they were purportedly not compared. And this duplicity happens again in the evaluation of the certified costs between proposals. Paragraph 17 demonstrates further bias in the process. NASA leaders, quote, through exchanges, provided SpaceX the opportunity to revise its price and management proposal to make its proposal awardable. Under Federal Acquisition Regulations Part 15 Type Discussion Rules, the agency clearly conducted discussions, and if an agency conducts discussions with one offeror, it must conduct discussions with all offerors under consideration for award. On acquisition.com, we looked up the FAR Regulations Part 15 document governing contracting by negotiation. At 15306, exchanges with offerors after receipt of proposals, the written rule for limits on exchanges states that government personnel shall not engage in conduct that favors one offeror over another, an edict that was clearly violated in this case when NASA gave SpaceX particular instructions on how to make their bid awardable. Further, at 15307, Proposal Revisions, regulations declare under Section B, the contracting officer may request or allow proposal revisions to clarify and document understandings reached during negotiations. At the conclusion of discussions, each offerer still in the competitive range shall be given an opportunity to submit a final proposal revision. However, the agency, leaders, claims it was not required to conduct discussions with all offerers because the exchanges with SpaceX were not discussions, they were now being called post-selection negotiations. From page 3, a leader selection document published April 16th of 2021, on April 2nd of 2021, I made a determination that it would be in the agency's best interest to make an initial conditional selection of SpaceX to enable the contracting officer to engage in post-selection price negotiations with this offerer. This decision was based on NASA's long-standing Option A acquisition strategy of making 2 Option A contract awards. While it remains the agency's desire to preserve a competitive environment at this stage of the HLS program, at the initial prices and milestone payment phasing proposed by each of the Option A offerers, NASA's current fiscal year budget did not support even a single Option A award. Working in close coordination with the CO, it was therefore my determination that NASA should, as a first step, open price negotiations with the Option A offerer that is both highly rated from a technical and management perspective, and that also had, by a wide margin, the lowest initially proposed price, SpaceX. So even though NASA's long-standing Option A acquisition strategy was for making 2 awards, even though she didn't have enough money for 1, leaders went to SpaceX with a suggestion to modify their contract to fit the money available. The issue, of course, is that the post-selection negotiations contained elements that should have been part of the pre-selection discussion between all parties. From paragraph 18, the quote of note here is, SpaceX's initial proposal was unawardable, and the agency used post-selection negotiations to allow SpaceX to make changes to render its proposal acceptable to the agency. Had the agency, leaders, correctly assessed SpaceX's non-compliant proposal with a deficiency during the evaluation period, SpaceX's proposal could not have been selected for award, pursuant to the solicitation's explicit instructions that proposals containing a deficiency are unawardable. The agency engaged in post-selection negotiations in order to correct an evaluation error made during the initial evaluation and to make SpaceX's proposal awardable. Therefore, the post-selection negotiations were part of the evaluation process. Exchanges where an offerer is allowed to revise price and other sections of his proposal are discussions, particularly where these exchanges are part of the evaluation process. The agency, leaders, attempts to circumvent requirements in procurement statute and the federal acquisition regulations regarding discussion by calling them post-selection negotiations. The agency actions here violate fundamental procurement principles regarding fairness. In paragraph 19, Blue Origin sums up the previous facts by saying the proposals were not supposed to be compared or evaluated against each other, but they obviously were. Yet NASA, leaders, claims offerers can't protest the award because the agency's contracting officer stated they were adjudicated independently, while they obviously were not, given the stringent common, technical, and management requirements laid out in the solicitation's guidelines. Blue Origin pulls no punches in paragraph 20. The agency violated the solicitation, federal procurement regulations, and statute, and an implied in-fact contract where it failed to treat all offerers fairly, rationally, and in accordance with law. NASA made it clear it would not award to any proposal which contained a deficiency, the solicitation stating offerers are hereby notified that proposals evaluated as having 1 or more deficiencies are unawardable, which was entirely disregarded when NASA selected SpaceX's non-compliant and deficient proposal for award. Paragraph 21 is another key paragraph, stating NASA admitted SpaceX's initial proposal failed to meet material solicitation requirements, including crucial safety requirements. During Blue Origin's GAO protest, it was eventually revealed that NASA offered SpaceX the opportunity to revise key sections of its initial price, technical, and management proposals, and leaders acknowledged she did not offer the same opportunity to any other offerer. From the Leaders Award document, after I reviewed this revised proposal and consulted with the SEP chairperson and CO, it was evident to me that it would not be in the agency's best interest to select 1 or more of the remaining offerers for the purpose of engaging with them in price negotiations. Following a final review of the offerer's SEP reports and SpaceX's revised pricing proposal, I made final Option A selection and award determinations as documented herein. As stated by Blue Origin at 21, This makes NASA's award to SpaceX fundamentally arbitrary, unfair, and irrational, giving special assistance to the SpaceX proposal, which still contained deficiencies even at the time of award. Moving further into the document, now we're outlining how SpaceX's paradigm and technical approach requires a minimum of 16 launches, meaning they had to conduct 16 FRRs under the initial solicitation wording. Instead, SpaceX proposed only one flight readiness review, 2 weeks prior to its final launch. NASA recognized the error in internal documents, but leaders ultimately failed to evaluate SpaceX's technical, management, or price proposals with respect to the extent of this error. And by waiving these requirements, leaders gave SpaceX a huge material advantage over the other offerers, removing 13 of the 16 FRRs, each of which would happen on launch pads 2 weeks prior to launch, eliminates data reviews, accompanying documentation, program reviews, and directly impacts schedules. It also increases risk to the program while demonstrating preferential treatment. Keep in mind, both the Blue Origin and Dianetic systems were designed to be compatible with existing launch technology. The SpaceX HLS required perfecting a launch system on top of creating a lander system, and of course their launch system continues to encounter serious setbacks on every launch. In paragraph 24, apparently there's even more requirements SpaceX failed to meet, but for some reason we don't get to see what those are. Paragraph 25 notes that had SpaceX been held to the same standards and assigned the appropriate deficiency, Blue Origin would have been next in line for an award, with the next best technical proposal and the next lowest price. So Blue Origin was clearly prejudiced against by these advantages that were afforded only to SpaceX. Further, as stated in paragraph 26, had Blue Origin been made aware of the FRR waiver, they too would have had an opportunity to revise their proposal to increase their chance of award with a lower-priced proposal. A proposal from SpaceX that was improperly favored despite being found by the contracting officer to be logically inconsistent with the requirements for 16 FRRs. A call that was obviously overridden by leaders when she made her final determination after her independent analysis. Her adjudication not only ignored critical weaknesses, but also double-credited positive attributes. Paragraph 28 goes through some very salient points here, despite the redaction of the first sentence, where the SCP appeared to have some choice, understated words about the Starship proposal, which, 1. proposed a risky and undeveloped launch vehicle which had not been fully designed, much less developed or demonstrated. 2. Required this undeveloped launch vehicle and accompanying vehicles to be developed at an extraordinarily rapid pace. 3. Requires this launch to be launched, redacted. 4. Proposed a launch schedule that requires 16 or more launches with each launch only 12 days apart, when FRRs were to be conducted 14 days in advance of each launch. 5. Requires never before tested, redacted, but in this case we're concluding the point refers to recovery of the booster with chopsticks because 6. Requires an undeveloped and untested redaction, which we are concluding refers to the propellant transfer between Starship and the 14 launched fuel tankers and possibly the orbiting fuel depot that does not exist. Since these were very strong concerns of the SEP, and the award was made to SpaceX by leaders anyway, we can conclude that she ignored these concerns in her independent analysis and final determination. But going back to point 4, if there is 12 days between 16 launches, that total system time to prep in orbit will go on for approximately 180 days, 6 months from the first launch to the final refill barring delays of any kind. And even then, there's only 12 days in between launches, which would make having an FRR for each vehicle 2 weeks in advance impossible to conduct without having multiple facilities, which SpaceX does not have even today. Nor do they have license to launch that number of vessels from Boca Chica, where they are restricted to 5 orbital launches per year. This paradigm requires a constant launch schedule where any one element would be cause for appreciable risk, but in combination with little margin for error is nothing short of irrational. Paragraph 29 notes the change to Artemis funding, thanks to the change in administration, where leaders stated in the award document that the agency now lacks sufficient funding to make even a single HLS award. However, the agency, leaders, changed and waived the FRR requirements with respect to SpaceX without notifying all offerers or amending solicitation to advise all offerers of these funding limitations. We've already shown where these statements appear in her selection document. Paragraphs 32 through 35 show how Blue Origin filed with the GAO in a timely fashion on April 26 of 2021, and how the GAO issued their decision on July 30th of 2021, releasing it publicly on August 10th of 2021. At which time, and only then, Blue Origin became aware of the non-compliance in the SpaceX bid regarding the FRRs. That information was previously sealed as protected material. How the courts expected Blue Origin to plead a case with key evidence like that under lockdown and seal is a complete mystery. Again, they were not playing on a level field. So the nature of the present action is summed up in paragraph 39, seeking to terminate the illegal and erroneous award to SpaceX, conduct meaningful discussion or clarification with Blue Origin as necessary, request final proposal revisions, reevaluate proposals in accordance with the terms of the solicitation, make a valid determination with the terms of the solicitation, make a valid award determination based on the reperformed evaluation, and grant any further relief that the court deem appropriate. Paragraph 43 seems out of place as being under jurisdiction, venue, and standing, and would probably have worked out better under the previous heading. Regardless, this is where Blue Origin informs the court how their proposal was declared ineligible for contract award because it purportedly contained 2 advance payments, which Blue Origin declares is incorrect and unreasonable. This contract denial, on this basis alone, was a choice made by leaders, as you can see in her words from page 18 of her selection document. I reviewed the SEP's calculation of Blue Origin's total evaluated price and conclude that it is accurate, based on the SEP's utilization of multiple price analysis techniques set forth in FAR 15404 1B and G. I have similarly high confidence in its conclusion that Blue Origin's price is fair, reasonable, and balanced. Finally, the SEP compared Blue Origin's proposed milestone payment amounts to its monthly expenditures and concluded that the contractor's investment was not unreasonably low or negative during performance, and that Blue Origin is thus assuming a fair sharing of risk throughout contract performance. And that all seems good, right? But then she continues on to say, however, the SEP did identify 2 instances of proposed advanced payments within Blue Origin's proposal, pursuant to Section 525 of the BAA. Proposals containing any advanced payments are ineligible for a contract award. I concur with the SEP's assessment that these kickoff meeting-related payments are counter to the solicitation's instructions and render Blue Origin's proposal ineligible for award without, and this is the important bit, without the government engaging in discussions or negotiations with Blue Origin, either of which would provide an opportunity for it to submit a compliant revised proposal. Going back to the FAR Part 15 document 15307, that is exactly what the contracting officer is supposed to do. Use discussions to clarify and document understandings reached during negotiations. It's written right into their SOP. Despite the SEP and the SSA both finding that Blue Origin's pricing was fair and accurate, and that the company was assuming an appropriate amount of risk, leaders took it upon herself to use her misinterpretation of the proposal document to declare Blue Origin's proposal ineligible for award. She stated this could have been resolved with Blue Origin through discussions or negotiations, then failed to conduct those discussions or negotiations. As we see later in the Blue Origin filing document under paragraph 111, it would not have even required negotiations. The wording could have been clarified with a single phone call. Yet despite being responsible for a multi-billion-dollar award, Kathy leaders could not be bothered to pick up the phone and make a call to Blue Origin, whereas she apparently had no problem picking up the phone to tell Musk to rework his proposal to under a specific dollar amount to get the loan available contract. Skipping forward over a lot of duplicated points being proven several different ways, to paragraph 79, we see for the first time what the respective numbers for the bids were. Blue Origin's proposal carried a price tag of $5.99 billion across all further stages of development. SpaceX's revised evaluated price was $2.94 billion, but as the section header states, the agency's evaluation determined SpaceX's HLS Option A proposal failed to meet FRR requirements. So the lower price tag should have had no bearing on this competition, and SpaceX should not have been awarded the contract for the reasons previously stated. But we'll pause here for a second to review these numbers. If $2.94 billion is the best payday SpaceX hopes to receive for meeting all future milestones of their Option A award, they can't possibly be profitable on this contract. In fact, they can't even make up their losses to date. And they've also already received several payments towards that $2.94 billion firm fixed cost. In a Spaces interview hosted by Tim Dodd, a month after the IFT-1 disaster. Musk had this to say about the ongoing finances of the Starship program.
The cost of all this, how much do you expect to spend on all that either this year or before you start flying real payloads?
Well, it's probably be a couple $2 billion this year, $2 billion-ish, all in on Starship.
And there's a kind of a struggle by other companies to raise funds lately for a number of reasons, and SpaceX has usually kind of been insulated from that. Do you see any kind of difference nowadays? Is SpaceX kind of thinking about fundraising differently, and does that affect how, the pressure on this Starship program at all?
We do not anticipate needing to raise funding. We think we don't think we need to raise funding. To the best of my knowledge, we do not need to raise incremental funding for SpaceX.
So, two things here. One, the burn rate at SpaceX for Starship runs about $2 billion per year. Two, Musk said that SpaceX will not need any more outside capital to keep the program running. The $2.94 billion contract that Musk signed with NASA therefore only provides less than 18 months of capital at their current spending levels. And they don't have anything to show for it yet, least of all any of the requirements and milestones laid out in paragraph 80, despite being awarded an acceptable technical rating by Kathy Leaders. And the thing that is probably most disturbing about the award given to Musk is that, according to paragraphs 101 through 104, jumping ahead a bit, Kathy Leaders contacted SpaceX on April 2, 2021, inviting SpaceX, and only SpaceX, to engage in post-selection negotiations, despite the selection letter being released on April 16th of 2021. Not only did Leaders allow SpaceX the opportunity to revise its price, payment schedule, review plan, performance work statement, and expenditure profile, she told them exactly what funds were being made available for this award. The award, therefore, was not $2.94 billion. It was $2,941,394,557, which is a rather precise number. And still, that's not going to come anywhere close to allowing SpaceX to break even on this contract, even if they manage to meet the requirements of it. Which brings us to Musk's declaration in April that they were not going to require additional funding for Starship. That statement was made following a $750 million raise in January of 2023, based on a $137 billion valuation, as reported by CNBC. But after Musk's declaration of financial stability, there was another $750 million raise announced June 24th of 2023 by Yahoo News at a valuation now at $150 billion. Another funding round, their 31st such round, was released on October 6, 2023, announced by Italy's largest bank, Intesa Sanpaolo, for an unknown investment size at an undisclosed valuation. And in December of 2023, CNBC reported another funding round in the works that jumped the valuation up to $180 billion, $43 billion higher than when it started the year, after two major launch disasters 7 months apart. This truly demonstrates how private company valuations are really based on no discernible or reliable metrics. It's simply whatever that last fool paid for a share times the number of shares. In going through web pages looking for information, we came across this page and bookmarked it immediately. USAspending.gov has all the details of the payments made to date on this contract, and it shows that SpaceX, without having a functional rocket, without having demonstrated refilling in orbit, despite not having a full-scale mock-up of the vehicle they intend to land on the moon to complete their contract, has already received the lion's share of the money they were expected to collect upon completion of a successful demonstration proving their ability to perform the Artemis 3 mission. From March 13th of 2020 to December 18th of 2023, SpaceX has received the following payments towards the firm-fixed total award of $2.94 billion. After initial award of $94 million, the 8- and 9-figure chunks of the cash were awarded on July 30th, 2021. That was for $300 million, $98 million more on November 12th of 2021, $84 million on May 11th of 2022, $344 million June 30th of 2022, $315 million on September 2nd, 2022, $147 million November 15th of 2022, $427 million on February 22nd of 2023, and $337 million on September 14th of 2023. Now, when did Kathy Leaders retire from NASA? Right about here, after SpaceX had already collected $1.83 billion of their $2.94 billion contract. So Musk has burned through this $2 billion, call it another $2 billion raised in 2023 with another round at a fool's valuation, and another $2 billion worth of funding rounds in 2022. That's $6 billion right there, with zero chance of making a profit on Artemis 3, even if Musk could get Starship to the moon safely. All things considered, Bezos' number of $5.99 billion was obviously a much more reasonable assessment of the program cost, and this is a great example of why tendered contracts should not always go to the lowest bidder. Paragraph 115 is headed, "The agency made a single award to SpaceX in spite of communicating intent to offerers to make multiple awards." That was the deal all parties entered into, that the field would be narrowed from 3 to 2, not from 3 to 1, especially when the one that was selected was shown preferential treatment at the expense of the other two. As paragraph 118 correctly states, NASA leaders made this selection based on price. My selection determination for SpaceX's proposal is based upon the results of its evaluation considered in light of the agency's currently available and anticipated future funding for the Option A effort. Which brings us to the 5 counts Blue Origin brought against NASA in this federal lawsuit. All the details of each count are detailed in the text beneath them, most of which we covered already. Count 1, unlawful waiver of material solicitation requirement. Count 2, NASA leaders engaged in improper and unequal discussions. Count 3, failure to amend solicitations with change in requirements. Count 4, failure to evaluate SpaceX proposal in accordance with the solicitation. And Count 5, breach of implied in-fact contract of good faith and fair dealing. So what was the point of launching the lawsuit? For that, you have to look to the prayer for relief at the end of the document. Blue Origin wanted the court to A, declare that Kathy Leder's award of the HLS Option A contract to SpaceX was arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law. B, wanted the court to enjoin, meaning urge, NASA and SpaceX to not continue the performance of that contract. C, wanted the court to direct NASA to open discussions with all offerers that would allow proposal revisions, reevaluate revised proposals, and make new selection and award. And D, have the attorney costs covered for making what was actually a very reasonable request that should have been supported by the GAO in the first place. It's important to realize that Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin did not lose this case. Despite the rock-solid reasoning in their complaint and the ability to call out leaders' duplicity according to the government's own FAR Part 15 standards, the case was never heard. The federal judge granted the government's motion to dismiss and deferred the decision-making authority back to the GAO, who stuck by Kathy Leder's selection even though the GAO appeared to be well aware the SpaceX bid had severe shortcomings. Then leaders, in turn, ignored any recommendations the GAO provided to her, such as requiring the additional FRRs. This action will wind up backfiring on the GAO in a big way, as we'll go through shortly. After the dismissal, Musk, of course, took another immature opportunity to gloat at Bezos' expense, accusing Jeff Bezos of retiring from Amazon only to pursue a full-time job at Blue Origin, suing SpaceX, which is obviously false on a couple of fronts. This suit wasn't against SpaceX or Musk at all. Blue Origin's case was against NASA, and it was not a frivolous lawsuit as many claimed it was either. It had a solid foundation. What it didn't have were the right ears listening to what it was saying. Having followed the development, or rather lack of development, of Starship for a couple years at this point, and having gone through weaknesses we saw in the vehicle, along with Starship's physical inability to make good on the promises Musk has made on its behalf, we had some very simple advice for Jeff Bezos and the team at Blue Origin that we shared in a tweet on August 18th of 2021. We said Bezos is playing this wrong. All he's got to do is keep plugging away at his system and have it ready when Starship fails. NASA will be knocking on his door eventually. It was completely obvious to us that Musk was not going to make good on his deadlines for Starship, so where Bezos and Blue Origin were protesting the selection with near-field goggles, we were looking down the road to when Starship proved to be as incompetently executed as we fully expected. At the time, Bezos was even willing to eat $2 billion of development cost to continue with the HLS program. Turns out it's a good thing NASA rejected that proposal. It saved him $2 billion. So now that we've gone through all the dry legal stuff, let's see how Blue Origin reacted after the case ended in Part 3.